So, welcome everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, based on whichever part of the world you're joining us from. So, let's start our masterclass Navigating Material and Substance Compliance. I am here today with my colleague Melvin, and together we will take you through the masterclass. Melvin, would you like to introduce yourself first?
Of course. Hello, everyone. I'm Melvin. I originally have a background in computer science, but I've now been with MakerSite for nearly 3 years. In this time, in both my roles as senior implementation engineer, but also as project manager, I have had the opportunity to accompany multiple compliance implementations, and I look forward to sharing that experience and expertise with you today.
Thanks, Melvin. I will now introduce myself. I am Shivangi Sharma, a material compliance expert. I joined MakerSite 3 months ago and bring over 10 years of experience in this field. And I have a background in chemistry, and I'm very excited to share my insights with you today. Okay, then. So before starting, let me quickly introduce you all to MakerSite. So we are a software as a service company headquartered in Stuttgart, Germany. MakerSite was founded in 2018 by Neil and Fabian, industry veterans with over 30 years of experience. We have more than 110 employees and 50 plus customers all over the world. And our mission is empowering and enabling companies to make smarter decisions and build compliant, safer, and more sustainable products through intelligent and data-driven analysis. Okay, then let's move on to the agendas that we have for this masterclass. So we will be discussing challenges for the North American manufacturers, regulatory overview, supplier data collection and mapping, compliance at scale with the digital solutions, recommendations, and a short Q&A session at the end. All right. Compliance challenges for North American manufacturing enterprises. Okay. Manufacturing is facing headwinds, and let's dive into the major causes for this. So we have complex documentation requirements. So as we know, regulations like TSCA, PFAS, REACH, etc., are evolving and getting stricter and more complex by the day. For example, REACH is generally updated twice a year, but last year it was updated 3 times. And hence the data collection process is getting burdensome and it's getting difficult to manage. The other reason is being tied up in inefficient patchwork data processes. This happens because first you have siloed material data that lives across disconnected systems like PLM, ERP, or even spreadsheets, which makes it difficult to consolidate for compliance reporting. And the other reason is manual supplier data collection. So relying on emails and forms to collect compliance document, which is time consuming and error prone. Third is being reactive and not proactive, meaning that compliance often gets addressed very late in the product life cycle, and that causes launch delays and costly rework or fines from non-compliance. And all of this eventually can lead to losing market access due to regulatory non-compliance. So if you are not compliant with all these regulations, then this can lead to product bans or import rejections or huge fines. Even your shipments can be stopped at the borders. So the bottom line is compliance today isn't just about using the right materials. It is about proving it with detailed, defensive, and dynamic documentation. Okay, so reporting is becoming unmanageable. So if your data landscape is disconnected, or if your supplier data is incomplete or of poor quality, then managing exponential regulatory growth becomes a challenge. And that cannot be solved by patchwork of solutions or relying solely on experts. And therefore, significant efforts are needed to align with global standards. Yeah. Need for compliance is growing exponentially. As we have already discussed in the last few slides, that the regulations and restrictions are growing exponentially. If we talk about PFAS, forever chemicals, they alone add up to 12,000 entries post 2020. That is why the old, simple legacy compliance tools are not sufficient anymore, as they can only handle like simple landscape and also lack in addressing compliance at scale. And for this reason, automated data management tools are becoming essential for tracking and verifying compliance across global supply chains. So as an example, let's talk a bit about manual versus automated skip reporting. So if you do skip reporting manually, you will spend a lot of time per product, collecting supplier data, manually formatting dossiers, and uploading them to ECA. And this could take weeks or even months, especially if like detailed information about each article needs to be verified or gathered from multiple suppliers. And there is high risk of data entry errors or even non-compliance in such cases. And the third one is it has very limited scalability. On the other hand, the automated processes, like when you do it in MakerSite, it automatically gathers component level data from suppliers and validates against skip requirements. It generates and submits dossiers to ECA in a few hours to a day, depending on the number of products being reported. And sometimes even in a few minutes if you have like pre-integrated and clean data and up-to-date documents from your suppliers. And it scales effortlessly across hundreds or thousands of products, reducing workload and errors. Data deficiency sustains these problems. So relying on basic product and cost data often leads to incomplete compliance. So without comprehensive supplier data like detailed material declarations, businesses risk missing critical regulations. Limited supplier data also hampers effective risk assessment and compliance reporting. And to tackle this, more detailed real-time supplier data will be necessary for proactive compliance. Automated tools can help track supply chain risks and automatically flag non-compliant substances, ensuring compliance in real time. Falling behind has consequences, of course. It has consequences for all your key roles in departments. For compliance experts, like without any automation, they are overwhelmed by manual repetitive reporting tasks and all this manual work limits their ability to focus on high value activities such as compliance strategies and risk mitigation. And for sales, product level compliance reports are becoming essential to close deals. For product managers, they are facing pressure from internal stakeholders to address compliance at design stage. And manufacturers lag because they are using outdated tools with unreliable data, incomplete and opaque supply chain data, and lack of scalable automated compliance reporting. Okay, so the next topic is regulatory overview, what you need to know and how to stay ahead. Regulatory horizon scans. So I won't be going into too many details here. You can see the preparation time for all and the deadlines for all these regulations. For PFAS, we now even have state level bans, like it is now being banned in textiles in New York and California. For RoHS, draft expiry dates for a few lead exemptions have been published, and exemptions that are going to be revoked will like slowly phase out in the next 12 to 18 months. New regulations to watch out for. As already discussed, California and New York banned PFAS in textiles in starting 2025 this year. Then there are TSCA and EPA developments that you need to keep an eye out for, like PFAS reporting rule under TSCA, and compliance begins this year. Ongoing risk evaluations for formaldehyde, flame retardants, and phthalates. You can expect more bans or restrictions on high-risk substances. New chemicals are under stricter review before market entry. And apart from this, there is an EU-wide REACH proposal to ban PFAS. That's called the Universal Ban. It is currently under review by ECHA. So the final decision is expected somewhere between this year or next year. So there could be some exemptions for medical uses, but it will have a huge impact on industries using PFAS in textiles, food packaging, and coatings, and even electronics. So all of these industries will need to look for alternatives. Regulatory overlap. So now with all these different state and national level regulations, it is natural to have an overlap. For chemical use and reporting, like companies face challenges with differing substance lists, reporting formats, and thresholds. A substance that is safe under TSCA may still be, may still need registration or restriction under REACH, resulting duplicative testing. And for product restrictions, gross versus REACH versus TSCA for electronics and coatings. So these regulations may restrict the same substances, for example, heavy metals or phthalates, but they may have different scopes or exemptions or even different thresholds. A product compliant with RoHS may still face barriers under REACH or TSCA due to broader use or use specific restrictions. Labeling and disclosure, TSCA versus state level PFAS disclosures. So state level disclosures require requirements, for example, in Maine, California, and New York, often exceed federal TSCA rules, mandating tracking, labeling, or reporting PFAS at very low thresholds, creating a complex patchwork of compliance obligations, which is difficult to follow. Then regulatory overlap, the challenges and best practices. The challenges that companies face with regulatory overlap are inconsistent reporting thresholds, ambiguities in defining what is hazardous, and misalignment between international and domestic regulations. And to tackle all of these, the best practices would be using a centralized system for compliance tracking, conducting cross-functional reviews, and last but not the least, staying proactive by monitoring and adapting to evolving standards and regulations. So that was all from my side. Thank you. Now Melvin will take you through the next part of the session.
Thank you for your introduction and your part, Shivangi. Yes, first of all, I will talk about supplier engagement, data collection, and in general, the data architecture that's going to be underlying really any compliance solution. Let us start with the minimum data that would be required to set you up with a compliance tool. That would be, as we have in bold, the bills of materials of your product, so we know their general structure, as well as the information who your suppliers are and who the contact person is at these suppliers in case you need to reach out to them for any inquiries. Additionally, we would of course want to integrate any existing compliance data you have, whether in the FMD or COC format. This could be data from an existing solution that you're migrating. This could be data you've been tracking in Excel so far, or it might even be that you've already set up some recurring processes through which data is regularly coming in and that you want to tie into your new tool where everything is being unified. Last but not least, we'd also ask you at MakerSite for your ECHA and SCIP account access so that you can submit your SCIP dossiers directly from MakerSite. Once we have this data that's coming from you and we're integrating it into the platform, then going to be enriched with the data coming directly from your supplier. So typically you will be doing supplier inquiries directly from your compliance tool, which enables the workflows around this and enables your suppliers to submit any missing COC or FMD data to you. In the next step, this data is then mapped against the regulatory and substance database, which in turn is what's going to enable the assessment or the calculation of the compliance status of your products with given regulations such as REACH, RoHS, or TSCA. I just mentioned FMD and COC files, but I wanted to dive a bit deeper into them for those of you who are not so familiar with these two data types. Really, these are the only two data types that are relevant in the compliance space, so that are actually going to be exchanged within the supply chain between different parties. Obviously, we have your bills of materials, but those typically stay within your boundaries. An FMD is a stronger of these two types of data. An FMD is a full material declaration, which means it really contains a complete disclosure of all the substances within a given part or product. It's typically exchanged in industry standardized formats. For example, this could be a Class D IPC file or an IMDS file. And why do I say FMD files are stronger? Well, once we know the exact makeup of a product at the substance level, we can calculate the compliance with any regulation, past, present, or future. So that means that when there's a 6-month update of REACH, for example, we don't need to collect data again. We can simply use the existing FMD file and check whether it is compliant with this new version of REACH where 2 new substances got added. On the other hand, we have the Certificate of Compliance, or COC in short. This is essentially an explicit statement of compliance with a given version of a regulation, or alternatively, the information that your supplier is not compliant. It can also be exchanged in standardized formats, such as a Class A to C IPC file, but it would also be fundamentally the result you get if you just send a simple questionnaire or even an email to your supplier where you ask him, hey, this specific product, is it compliant with REACH as of today, as of the version February 2025? As a consequence, if in 6 months REACH regulation gets changed and 2 new substances get added, or some new regulation gets released for which you need to be compliant, you will then have to reach out to your supplier again and say, hey, dear supplier, 2 new substances got added to REACH. Is your product still compliant? Now, once we have gathered this data that's coming from your side, we have added the supplier data to it. We've combined all this in a recurring workflow, even into a tool such as MakerSite or another compliance tool that is giving you your assessments and calculating whether you're compliant or not. We're looking at the outputs. And here we have 2 types of outputs. First of all, we have the external reporting. This is when external parties, such as your customers, but also regulatory bodies, are asking you to submit information about your compliance, or even asking you to submit information in order to become compliant to them. This is something that you really want to have as an afterthought that should be automated as much as possible. And so here we recommend that you leverage tools, which in turn are leveraging standardized formats and are enabling you to set up automated data flows so that you're not dependent on manual actions to get the data from your compliance tool to wherever you actually need it in the end. On the other hand, we have internal reporting. This too, we can divide into 2 parts. One is what I like to call zooming in. You have a certain bill of material, a certain product, and it's not compliant. You want to be able to immediately drill into it and find out what are the cause of the not compliance, and in the next step, what can you do to get it compliant again and regain your market access. On the other hand, you have the zooming out, the large picture. Across your portfolio of hundreds, maybe even thousands or tens of thousands of products, which ones are compliant? Which ones are not compliant? Across your suppliers, which of your suppliers are responsive, are not responsive? When was data last updated? You want to have dashboards that give you this information at any point in time, so you can update your stakeholder and also drive your own decision making. On top of that, you might want to have flow back into your internal systems, such as your ERP or PLM, because you might have other stakeholders in the company that don't directly work on compliance, but that interact with the compliance data. And you don't want these people to need to have access to your compliance tool and get onboarded to it. Nor do you want them to be reaching out to your compliance team every time asking for the compliance status of a certain product or business unit. You want them to have information at the summarized level that they needed directly available in the tools in which they work anyway, day to day. And so you should look for tools that enable this. If we talk specifically about the outputs now, MakerSite supports two different approaches here, and it might be to you to think about which one best suits your particular business. On one hand, we offer reports and dashboarding directly in MakerSite, which allow you to build visualizations directly on top of your source of truth, of your compliance software. On the other hand, we also enable you to easily and in bulk extract information on a live basis into whatever other systems. This could be, for example, the ERP and PLM system I just mentioned on the previous slide, but this could also be you deciding that you don't want to use a dashboarding in MakerSite or in your compliance tool. You want to own it yourself and build it in a BI tool, such as Power BI, where you are then really able to adapt it to the last detail, to your specific quirks, your specific edge cases, and your specific business needs, and also enabling you in the future to have full ownership of this and adapt your dashboards however you need them. For example, if you're addressing a new market, a new product line, or you have some focus task or focus group for a specific issue, and you want to track that progress. Last but not least, we obviously also have the output of dossiers I would go to skip. Next, I would like to talk a bit about compliance at scale. In this section, I'll be talking both about the importance of scaling compliance nowadays, building on what Shivangi mentioned earlier, but we'll also go a bit beyond material compliance and see how we can move into other areas of compliance, particularly sustainability compliance. Don't worry, it will be more of a primer. The common customer adoption journey we see is the one we have on the screen. And this actually, I would say, happens twice. First, the first time the customers encounter these topics and start building up experience and interactions and capabilities with them. And then at a later stage, when their maturity grows and they go towards software tools to accompany them on this journey, we often see a similar journey again, or similar adoption story. So the first is product compliance. This is the material compliance we've been talking about. And the reason this tends to be the most mature is very simple. This is where regulations have been out the longest. And also, as Shivangi highlighted earlier, where there are some real strict fines or bans that can happen if you're not compliant. Product sustainability is something where also most companies by now have had the experience of a certain customer asking them for a product carbon footprint for a specific product. And this was delivered often ad hoc, maybe with the help of a consultant. But then over time, the requests keep coming and keep growing. You start in-housing these capabilities. And then as time progresses, the requests keep scaling to the point where you realize you will need to be able to provide PCFs or LCAs for your entire product portfolio. And that is the latest point in time where people start looking for technology solutions to enable them to scale their experts. And this is similar to what we also see in corporate compliance, where, for example, if we look at Scope 3, corporate carbon footprinting, by now, nearly every company is submitting some kind of corporate carbon report. However, the regulatory pressure is really just starting to ramp up now to the point of mandating this across industries, of establishing exactly how this needs to be reported. and where it's no longer really that great of an option to have one person do this end of the year in an Excel file, but you start to need additional capabilities like looking into the past, planning for the future, assessing your progress towards goals, recalculating your past emissions based on a new methodology. And this is also where, at some point, tool support becomes nearly mandatory. If we focus back on material compliance for a second, why is scalability actually so important and what can we do about it? Well, first of all, basically every company is still expanding. This can be entering new markets. This can be new product lines or product areas that you're addressing. This can even be external growth, such as mergers and acquisitions. In this context, you want material compliance to be something that is taken care of, a checkbox that you tick. You don't want it to be something that is slowing you down. Because if you're ready to enter a market, but you need to pause it for 3 months because you haven't figured out the compliance part yet and need to manually update your regulatory databases and interact with consultants and send out questionnaires to your suppliers, then you're essentially losing revenue because you're ready to enter a market, but you can't because of compliance. And that is really something you want to avoid. How can you avoid that? Well, centerpiece is going to be automation. You want to leverage tools that take care of, for example, the regulatory database updating for you, that enable you to automate your workflows as far as possible, and also automate your data flows as far as possible. You also want to look at standardization. This does look at standardized data formats, such as IPC files we mentioned earlier, but it really doesn't end there. You should also really think about standardization inside your company in terms of documentation, in terms of processes, across your different regions, your different business entities. Because having this standardization is going to make your audit smoother. It's going to make it easier to train your resources or also reallocate your resources internally, or maybe allocate a partner. Also, when you're going to be interacting with software solutions, whether that is changing software solutions or adding a new one, the more streamlined, well-documented, and standardized your environment already is, the easier this process is going to be, both for the solution you're integrating, but also for yourself in the process of integrating them. We also need to remember, and this goes back to what Shivangi mentioned, the regulatory landscape keeps evolving, and overall what we are seeing is it keeps getting more complex and evolving faster over time. So it's not like we're moving towards an asymptote, but rather we're facing exponential complexity. And here, scalable systems are designed from the outset to be able to pivot for new challenges, new laws, new policies, because this is their business model. And so they will be, let's say, a new regulation comes out, they will already be there with the updated regulatory database. They will do in the background the logic changes that are required to support it, so that you can really focus on the part you need to focus on, such as, does this regulation actually apply to all my products? Which ones does it apply to first? Which suppliers do I need to reach out to? How can I update my training materials? In the end, what this all brings you is cost efficiency too. Having a scalable process means you're reducing manual action, you're reducing redundancy, you're reducing dependency on external services, and really having a software that you own and a data architecture that you own that you can automate and optimize for your business context as you go. And so while there might be some upfront investments, in the end, reducing repeat cost really is the way to go. Now let's look a bit into going from product compliance and beyond. If we set up a software solution for product compliance, your initial setup will look something like this. For material compliance, sorry. Where, as discussed, you have your bills of materials and your supplier information coming from your enterprise systems, and then your suppliers providing you additional data such as FMTs or COCs. You then have a compliance tool that aggregates this information, maintains a regulatory database, and gives you the compliance outputs you're interested in. But what if you want to go beyond material compliance? Well, simply by adding material information to your bombs. So this is the information whether a given screw or part is made of steel or stainless steel or copper. You now enable the system to potentially calculate LCAs for you. So the output could be product carbon footprints for your products. If now to this information, you simply add a bit of transactional information. Transactional data in this context refers to the purchases that you make over the course of a year. You are then able to calculate your Scope 3.1 corporate carbon footprint, or to evaluate your obligations under CBAM. Furthermore, if you have some information about alternative suppliers that are maybe you're not purchasing from actively right now, but you've already vetted these as valid suppliers for your supply chain, then adding this information into a tool can enable eco-design. This could be, for example, checking, hey, if I change the supplier for this part, does my product carbon footprint go down or go up? Or do I remain compliant from a material compliance point of view? Maybe even in some cases, you are not compliant, but by changing the supplier, you can become compliant again for your product and regain access to a market without having to go through costly redesign. So if we take that into account and we imagine a world where we've now integrated these different data types, we look at an image that looks more like this, where we are still putting data from your enterprise systems, but it's being enriched not only with data directly from your suppliers, but also with supply chain data and databases, for example, around sustainability, in still one single tool, which is really not necessary, but is great because that allows you to do the eco-design in multiple dimensions and get outputs in different dimensions, not only compliance, also cost, sustainability, whether product sustainability or corporate cost sustainability, and even supply chain risk. That was already the main part of our masterclass, but next we have some key recommendations we still want to share with you before the Q&A. Our key recommendations center, first of all, about integrating your supplier data. The first step in this process is to integrate any supplier data you already have into your compliance evaluations. Once you've done this, namely, you can easily identify the data gaps. Data gaps can be of two kinds. Where have I not gotten any data? And where am I not compliant? Once you have that, you can target those data gaps specifically with your supplier outreach campaigns in order to close them. In this process, we really recommend you leverage FMDs, so full material declarations, to avoid supplier fatigue in the long run. But avoiding supplier fatigue goes beyond that. We really recommend you see this relationship with your suppliers not as a process where they owe you something, where you make a request and then you ask them, when are you finally done? We need this data from you. But really as a partnership. Because in the long run, what you're trying to achieve is to have an agile compliance solution that is always up to date and always able to react to any new challenges. And that will entail at certain points in times reaching out to your suppliers. So to be able to be updated, you need your suppliers to respond quickly. But your suppliers will only respond rapidly if they are facing an enjoyable process, if we're honest about it. So yes, on one hand, you want to educate your supply chain on why it's important and why they have to submit this information. But you also want to listen to them about their pain points in your process and how you can alleviate their pain points so they are essentially happy to participate in this process and it does not cost them much. Our second recommendation focuses around owning compliance in-house. Only if you really own the compliance in-house will you be able to react quickly, because if you're dependent on a third party to give you an evaluation, maybe then you even want to double check it with someone else because you're not 100% sure of your own landscape, you're going to lose time and money. But also, if you want to make sure you adapt your entire flow to make it pain-free for your suppliers, to make it as automated as possible, to adapt it to your specific business needs. In the end, you having the ownership of it is the best way of doing it. And last but not least, we not only suggest that you optimize your supplier integration, but also that you really streamline external reporting so that it really becomes an afterthought. You do not want to spend manual effort on getting data out there. You want to leverage standardized formats and automated data flows as much as possible to make skip submissions a matter of a few clicks and making data available, for example, for your customers, at best fully automated, or again, with as little manual interaction required as possible. In the end, this is how you can ensure continuous product availability, market access, and just generally being ready to react quickly. To summarize, we suggest you do the following tomorrow. First of all, grading your bill of materials with your existing information that is available and finding out where you have data gaps. Second, building a dashboarding environment that is live updated, so you always have the latest data available at your fingertips and can update stakeholders or prioritize the work of your team without first having to do any kind of data analysis. And last but not least, working with a solution or towards a solution where you're able to evaluate alternatives, be this alternative ingredients or alternative suppliers. You don't want to make regrettable decisions which could have been avoided with some early stage substitution analysis. In short, we're asking you the question, what do you think your life would look like if you're no longer busy moving data left to right in Excel files or from emails to Excels, but rather really focusing on where you, as a compliance expert in a compliance team, have the most value added? With that, we come to our Q&A, and I'm curious to see your questions. So I see a first question, which is, how can the automated data collection save time, as the data collection is dependent on the suppliers, such as their test report? You will never be able to eliminate a dependency on your suppliers to some degree, but there are two parts where you can save time. On one hand is having a tool that allows you to, with few clicks, send out requests to all your suppliers for all your parts by selecting which exact, so for example, by easily filtering what you actually want to engage. Saves you time on setting up, for example, email campaigns or so on. And in general, having a tool that enables you to automate your workflows as far as possible and track the relevant information so that, for example, you only have to click accept or reject, and it's automatically stored who accepted what information at what point in time, rather than having an additional step of writing into an Excel file, I checked this email on that date and this was the result. And on the other hand, your supplier is probably also in an environment where they need to provide data for multiple products at the same time, and you're probably not the only one asking them for data. So making sure that they have a tool where it's easy for them to submit data in bulk, where they get maybe the support they need if they face any issues and so on, rather than, again, facing different Excel format that different customers are sending them and they have to fill out manually. Can speed up their reaction time. Sure, they might still have to wait for a test report, but most likely they already know the compliance status somewhere in their systems, and they just have to transfer it from wherever system they have it right now to you, and you want to make that process as easy as possible for them. And then we have a question, maybe you want to take that one, Shivangi? What is the impact of the new French PFAS ban in technical textiles?
Yeah, so France has banned PFAS in all textiles, and it will be effective from 2026, if I remember correctly. So textile products will not, you won't be able to sell textile products in France if you have PFAS in them. So for that, you still have some time to prepare. And you have to make sure that if you're manufacturing textiles that you don't have PFAS in them, you have to look for alternatives. You have to maybe get in touch with your R&D team and look for a different design for your products. And even you can open up a conversation with your suppliers and maybe update supplier contracts to say that we won't be accepting any textiles that contain PFAS in them. And so yeah, you still have time to prepare for it, but I think it is just the starting. And with France being the first one in EU, I think there'll be more countries following the same thing, and we will have more such bans coming up very soon. So the earlier you start, you will have a competitive advantage, because from now on there's no going back. So the regulation will be there, and you will have to be prepared for it.
Awesome.
I think that.
I'm happy to take the next two.
Mm-hmm.
The next question is, can I have more details about FMD data modeling? How do you evaluate the compliance? Is MakerSite doing the testing? So in FMD contains the information in a certain product of all the substances, typically with the CAS numbers that are in there. So then if we have a certain regulation, let's say EU REACH, which says you cannot have more than 0.1% of lead, you cannot have more than 0.1% of cadmium compounds, and so on. We can simply take this FMD file, I'm simplifying a bit, but check what is the total weight of the file, what is the total weight of all the lead in that file, and then based on that, evaluate whether you're above or beyond or below the threshold, and hence calculate the compliance. Additionally, what we also offer is some plausibility checks, so making sure that the weight in the file add up and the file is well formed and so on. And these files can also contain information about, for example, RoHS exemptions, which are then also automatically taken into account. So really, of course, your supplier is still responsible for giving you a correct file that contains accurate information. But as long as we have that file with accurate information, we are then able to do all the, testing, or at least all the assessment calculation for any given regulation. The next question, I hope that answered the question. If not, feel free to follow up. The next question was, for automated data collection, what does the platform provide? Out-of-the-box connectors, ? We provide multiple things. So on one hand, we make it very easy to, I'm not sure if that's what you refer to with out-of-the-box connectors, but to integrate, for example, with your ERP system and just import your existing BOMs, your existing supplier information, and their email addresses, so that all information is already there. And then you can just select, basically in 10 clicks, for these, I want to collect data for all parts from the supplier, or I want to collect data for all the parts across all my suppliers, which are not compliant with RoHS right now. So then you just filter not compliant by RoHS, and you create a campaign where you can set some more features, such as if you want to set reminders and so on. And that data is then, or these campaigns are then sent out. Additionally, what we provide is easy data entry for your suppliers. So the ability for them, if they're selling you hundreds of parts or dozens of parts, to submit compliance information in bulk without having to click, one by one for every substance and every product through this, and enable them, particularly if they're compliant and don't have much to submit this data easily, or also to submit data in industry standard formats like the IPC files, so that again, you don't have to do really any manual entry. They just drag and drop the IPC files into the campaign they receive, and their compliance status is updated. And then last but not least, and I guess it's not fully automated, but it is the ability for you to then easily accept or react or interact with these submissions, and also, as you want, have out-of-the-box connectors out of MakerSite, so you can track the status of your data collection campaigns. The next question is, what measures do you or the software implement to verify the plausibility and accuracy of documentation received from various suppliers? That's a great question. We can do particularly on electronically readable files, so files that are intended for compliance with exchange, like FMD or COC files. What we can do there is plausibility checks, and that is what we do. Generally, though, a certain ownership for verifying what your supplier is sending to you remains with you. We see ourselves primarily as a software provider and not as a consulting service that checks individually submissions from suppliers, particularly if they submit supporting evidence in PDFs. However, here again, we're able to interact with partners. So if you say that that particular piece of work is a challenge for you, then what we can do is put you in touch with a partner who can then also work in the MakerSite solution with you and take care of that part of the work package.
Okay. The next one. Are all the regulations mentioned in your presentation already configured in MakerSite. Yes, we have all the regulations that we had in our presentation. Are you also able to track substances of concern SOC required by CSRD? So currently, I'm not sure if we have CSRD, uh, but we can, like with the help of our data team, we can develop even custom restricted lists, and we are like continuously updating the RSLs within MakerSite. So whatever the new regulations we have, we will be updating them in MakerSite. Melvin, do you want to add anything?
No. The next two questions I'm happy to take.
Yeah.
But nothing to add there. The next two questions seem to be more on sustainability and less on the material compliance. The first one is, how does a platform handle data gaps or supplier-specific emissions data? Supplier-specific emissions data, we can either integrate if you have it already available, or it can also be collected from suppliers through MakerSite. And then data gaps. Here I understand that you're referring to bills of materials, maybe, which have data gaps, and how we would handle a product carbon footprint in that context. Sorry, my laptop is insisting that I update right now. I hope it doesn't do that. And there the answer is we have an AI that helps us close data gap in accordance with our experts. That's a very summarized answer, but it's not the focus of this masterclass. The next question also is about sustainability. It's actually two questions in one. Does the platform include any emission data sets or connect with any external ones? And the answer is absolutely yes. We integrate with multiple emission databases, which are external databases that are integrated in MakerSite. And on top of that, we also have some of our own sustainability data. And besides carbon, are any other indicators covered? Absolutely. We cover all the dimensions of a normal life cycle assessment, and this is always the case. So that is carbon, and not just carbon, but the different shades of carbon. So carbon, biogenic carbon, fossil carbon, but also all the other dimensions such as water use, ocean acidification, eutrophication, and so on. We have, next question is if we have any experience in using the Japanese Sherpa format. We have encountered that format in exploration and discussions with prospects and customers. However, we do not currently have any customers that are using it. So we know that we can support that format, but it's not something we currently have out of the box. But it wouldn't be a large challenge to change that. Then we have one more sustainability question. How is the AI working for addressing the data gap is validated for carbon footprint? Does it not need third-party evaluation or validation? Third-party validation is optional, but absolutely something we support. When you're looking at third-party validation, there's actually, in the sustainability space, two types of validation you can get. You can get an individual result, so the result of an individual product validated. This is product-specific validation. And then there is system validation or system approval. And in the second case, what the third-party approver is doing is looking together with you, our customer, and with us, MakerSite, and the data that is coming from the customer, at how the data is processed, how the AI is working in general. And he is validating that the system that we build, right, which starts with your data and continues with our AI and also our databases we use, in the end is producing results that are conform with whatever standard you're interested in. Obviously, there's different standards out there, from a simple PCF to an EPD. And once you have that approval from the auditor, all your results that are produced are going to be valid. And then this is just a process where then every year or every 2 years, the auditor would come back and essentially double check that the system is still performing as before. The next question is whether we can elaborate on the licensing model for MakerSite. At least I can give a quick introduction. Overall, it is subscription-based, and the main drivers are going to be the amount of data you're using and the amount of users you're using. It might be tied also to the modules. So if you're deciding to do only compliance or compliance and sustainability, but overall it is based on the amount of different parts and the complexity of your products and your user base. The next question, I'm not entirely sure. It is asking, does a software track emerging issues, especially those resulting from NGOs or societal pressures? What we enable you to do in material compliance is not only to evaluate compliance with, regulatory regulations, you can also submit your own substance lists. So if, for example, let's say you're 10 years ago, right, and PFAS bans are not a thing yet from a regulatory point of view, but already are, coming up from an NGO, you could submit a list of PFASs to MakerSite and then evaluate compliance against it without any issue. If you're talking about, I'm not sure what exactly else you have in mind. So if you have something else in mind, maybe you can update your question and we can take it there. Okay. Then from my side, thank you all for your participation. Thank you all for your questions. And I hope we were able to teach you some new insights that you didn't know before.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay. Thank you and have a good day.